Which one is Will?
That's probably me.
There you go. That's
And so we joined the 1st Minnesota Infantry. Do you have any of you folks know what the infantry is? No, okay, the infantry are the foot soldiers, and we carry all of our equipment. Where do you think we carry all of our equipment? Right on our backs, right? So I've got my blanket here, I've got my cartridge box where I carry my ammunition, and my knapsack here where I put all my extra clothing, and I keep my water in my canteen and my food in my haversack here. So I've got to carry everything that I need as a soldier right here on my shoulders. You think that gets heavy? Yeah, probably pretty heavy. And so we joined the 1st Minnesota Infantry, and we fought in some of the war's earliest battles. We fought at Manassas in Virginia, and we fought also in Virginia in the summer of 1862 on a place called the Virginia Peninsula. And after one of those battles there in 1862, Isaac and I decided to hang back and care for our regiment's wounded. And so we gave them bandages, and we dressed their wounds, and we gave them water to help care for them. But soon we became prisoners, and the Confederates took us to Richmond, to one of their prison camps called Bell Island, an island in the middle of the James River. And we didn't really have much food, and they didn't give us much food or water. And so one day I was able to steal a pass that one of the Confederate officers had. He had his signature on it. And so with a little practice, I practiced his signature over and over again until I got pretty good at it. And so I was able to make a fake pass to issue Isaac and I and our friends some more rations. And so we had a little bit more to eat. And I think that's what helped us out there at that prison camp. But by June of 1863, we had been exchanged, and we made it our way back to the 1st Minnesota Infantry, and we started marching northward. In early June, Robert E. Lee started to head north. We didn't know if he was going maybe to Maryland again, or maybe somewhere in Pennsylvania. But we had to catch up to him, and we had to figure out where he was going and try to stop him before he got too far north. And so we put our equipment on our backs, and we started marching. Sometimes 15 or 20 or 30 miles in a single day. Have any of you folks marched 30 miles in a day? Probably not. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, and that's some of the hardest marching that I've ever done in my experience in this war so far. It was either raining and made the roads muddy, our shoes were almost sucked off in the mud, and our equipment was caked with mud, or it was either really sunny. And so the roads would dry out and big clouds of dust would form, and we'd be covered in dust. And it was a very difficult march. We made our way as best we could northward, and I myself one day had to drop out because my feet were so blistered. And I had to do the best I could to catch up to other friends in the regiment. On the last day of June, June 30th, we came to a halt, and Isaac went out into the countryside, and he was able to get us some fresh bread and some jellies, and some other foods that some nice Pennsylvania women gave him. And he brought them back to camp, and we had a very nice meal together, better than our normal rations that we received from the government. And we laid down that evening, and we talked as we usually did before we went to sleep, and we used our knapsacks as pillows for us to lay down. But I didn't realize at that time that might be the last time we'd lay down and sleep together. Because by July the 2nd, we had reached the battlefield here. On the afternoon of July the 2nd, we were ordered into the fight. We looked around, we formed in our battle line, and we looked to our left and we looked to our right, and we didn't see any other Union troops around us, but out in front of us there were thousands of Confederates. And we were ordered into our battle line to charge towards those oncoming Confederates. And we had no support around us. We were soon given the order to fall in, double quick, march. And we marched at a jog towards these oncoming Confederates. Soon our Colonel Colville, ordered us to charge bayonets and we leveled our muskets and we charged towards this enemy, and we halted at a creek bank and we started to pour fire into these Confederates. We loaded and fired, and myself being a sergeant, I was ordering men up to the front of the line to keep firing as fast as they could. And soon our force was overwhelmed. These Confederates started to push us back, and we had to fall back from where we started. I had seen many of my friends and comrades be taken down with wounds, but there was no time to stop, and I even thought I saw my brother Isaac go down, but I couldn't halt. Halting might decide the battle against us. And so we fell back to where we had begun this charge. And that evening I went out and I looked for my brother because he didn't come back to the regiment. And I searched all over the battlefield looking for him, but I couldn't find him. That night I wrote my daily journal entry of my experiences that I've done through the war. And on the night of July the 2nd, I wrote in that entry, and I ended it with a question: where is Isaac? The next morning we woke up, the morning of July the 3rd, and Mr. Snow of our regiment came over to me and he said he thought he saw my brother dead upon the field. And he took me to the spot, and I found it to be all too true. So I took William Cundy and James Brown, and we found a shovel, and we began to dig a grave for Isaac. We buried him in his clothing, and I took a few of his possessions, his journal and his watch, which I intend to mail home to our parents. And I looked down upon him in the grave and I remarked, "Well, Isaac, all I can give you is a soldier's grave." I found a piece of wood, a scrap of wood, and with my pocket knife I inscribed I.L. Taylor, 1st Minnesota Infantry, to mark his grave so that his position, his identity would not be lost. And if our boys are ever buried somewhere else, his identity will go along with him. But I lost my brother in this fighting, but I'm going to go on to fight in many more battles, I'm sure of it. And I hope to partly avenge the death of my brother here at the Battle of Gettysburg. But thank you for listening to me, and thank you for coming here to Gettysburg.
Wow, Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm so sorry that you lost your brother, but you're so brave to continue on. Would you be able to stand here for a second and see if any of those people in the audience have questions for you that they would like to ask? All right, thank you. Does anybody have a question you would like to ask our soldier Patrick today? Yes.
Nathan says, you can't go to war, you don't have a gun.
Oh, wondering about your gun. What type of gun did you have?
Well, I don't have my gun with me because the reason I was able to come over here is our regiment made a halt and we stacked our arms. And the other boys are going out to fill up their canteens. And so I wandered over here and was able to talk to you. So my musket's back with the regiment.
Good, yes, a soldier has to have his musket. I'm wondering, Patrick, I have a question. What type of food did you eat? You said the government gave you money. What were some, or food, I should say. What are some of the foods you ate?
Well, the food that we ate wasn't the best. We would get something that looked like a big cracker, and it was very, very hard, called hardtack. And it was just really a bunch of flour and a bunch of water they would mix up and cut it into big squares and give it to us. But by the time we usually were given it, there was all kinds of bugs, and it was moldy and rotten by the time we got it. The meat that we were given was salted very heavily, either beef or pork. Sometimes we'd be given beans, a lot of coffee we would drink, so it really gets old after a very short period. That's why when Isaac came back with those cakes and pies, we really took advantage of it.
Yeah, I bet you did. I bet it was really good. Anybody else have a question? Over here, yes. What's your question? Go ahead. Say the microphone.
Did you ever have to stop, did you ever get to stop marching for them?
Did you ever get breaks when you were marching? Like, was marching something you were doing all the time? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Tell us about marching and getting a break.
Sure, we would typically march for several miles, and we would come to a halt, and we'd try to refill our canteens and rest a little bit. But our march here to Gettysburg, we were trying to catch up to General Lee, so they kept pushing us to try and catch up to the Confederates and figure out where they are. So some days we marched 15 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles in just one day. So as very stressful and very difficult to keep up, but they would give us a break every once in a while.
That's good. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else have any questions? Yes, I'll come back to you. What's your question? Say more. Were you ever shot or wounded in a battle? Bring the microphone back up to the picture.
No, myself, I was never shot or wounded. I had some close calls, and I remember when we made our charge here that I could hear bullets zipping by me. But some of my friends on either side went down, but I was fortunate enough not to be wounded.
That's good. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, we have a question. What's your question? What do you think? Do you ask this one? All right, I'll come back to you. Thank you. I notice your uniform is pretty dirty. Do you get a chance to change your uniform a lot and have fresh clothes or take a bath or anything like that?
We don't get to change our clothes too much. We're only issued maybe 2 pair of trousers in a year, or a jacket or 2 throughout the year. 2 shirts or 3 shirts typically, so we get pretty dirty pretty quickly. And I remember when we were marching here, some boys, we came to a halt near Goose Creek, and we washed our uniforms, but soon the order came to fall in, and so we had to pack up our wet shirts and to dry them. We slung them over our knapsacks, but it was one of those hot, dusty, dry days, and so instead of drying, they just got caked with mud, so we just threw them out instead of even trying to save them at another time. But we do get quite dirty quite often, and we rarely get to take a bath, but it's kind of typical of the soldier's experience.
Wow, so you had to dry them on your back. Anybody else have any other questions for our soldier? Yes, over here. What's your question?
Shoot a wounded?
Would you ever shoot at someone who was wounded?
No, I wouldn't shoot anyone that was wounded. Like I said, when Isaac and I were captured in 1862, we were actually taking care of the wounded, not only of our own army, but some of the Confederates that were there as well. So we tried to care for both of them as much as we could.
Anybody else? Anybody else? All right, well, let's give a round of applause to Patrick as he's been here sharing with us. We're going to let you get back to your regiment, Patrick. You may have to march on. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I used to work here for the Park Service, and I did their living history programs for a summer. And so I was just really taken by the story of the Taylor brothers, and would typically take the visitors through the National Cemetery to the Minnesota plot. And the unfortunate thing is that after Isaac's buried on the battlefield, and when they reinter the soldiers to the National Cemetery, there's no Isaac Taylor stone. There's many unknowns in the Minnesota section. He very well could be one of those, but unfortunately we don't know the exact whereabouts of Isaac Taylor, and I just was really kind of drawn by that aspect of the story.
So how long have you been doing presentations as Patrick?
Patrick, on and off for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. I've kind of had to bring him out of retirement. I haven't done it in a few years.
Okay. So anything you want to say to Minnesotans who may be watching this?
We thank you for your service here, and I know a lot of the soldiers, like Patrick himself, not only went through one enlistment, but when their term expired, they re-enlisted and fought to the very end of the war.